Welcome to the Anti-Architect Podcast. I am your host, Christian Giordano. As president and owner of the design firm Mancini Duffy, I am driven by a quest for learning and radically changing the industry. With this podcast, I'm hoping to improve the industry that I'm so passionate about by taking a critical look at how architects work through a variety of voices and shared experiences. Hello, Anti-Architect Podcast listeners. I am excited to have Robert W. Adler Jr. as my guest here in studio on the Anti-Architect Podcast. Rob Adler is the foremost residential architect in Monmouth and Ocean counties in New Jersey. He received his degree in architecture from Cornell University in 1986, and by 1989, he had established his own firm in Long Branch, New Jersey. Fast forward nearly 35 years, and Rob's practice has expanded from designing single-family homes to designing commercial projects and major developments. Today, he boasts a portfolio featuring some of the most prestigious addresses and clientele along the Jersey Shore. In addition to his architectural practice, Rob has expanded his business pursuits. He owns R.W. Adler Builders, a local high-end construction company, holds a stake in Sustain Sports, a sports-based real estate development firm, and in Ecological Resources Group, ERG, an environmental development company. Rob's work has received significant recognition in numerous publications. He has been featured in Dream Homes of New Jersey, been on the cover of Remodeling magazine, where he earned a spot on their distinguished Big 50 list, and he was highlighted as one of the nation's finest architects in the nationally acclaimed book, Signature Homes. Rob is a member of the American Institute of Architects, the Jersey Shore chapter of the AIA, the Association of Home Builders, the National Trust for Historic Preservation, and is the chair of the Rumson Historic Preservation Committee. Despite his accomplishments, Rob maintains a pretty low profile, but thankfully today he has agreed to be on the show. Rob, I'm so excited to have you here.
I'm really excited to be here as well. It's great to see you.
So I want to tell a little bit of story about kind of why it's so special that you're here. You started my career for all intents and purposes. And, you know, it's extremely meaningful to have you here. And about 35 years ago, I would say, if your firm is about 35 years old, I would say about 30 years ago, I was an architecture student going to the University of Miami. And when I came home from the summer, I was expecting to go back to lifeguarding. And my parents said, no, you need to get a job in your chosen profession. No more lifeguarding for you. And I remember saying like, oh, I'm way too green. Nobody's going to hire me. I just went to like my first year architecture school. It's never going to happen. And so for the one and only time in my life, I made a cold call. I've never made another cold call in my entire life since. But I looked up architects in the Yellow Pages.
Way back when we had Yellow Pages.
And the first name I came across was Adler. And I picked up the phone and I called you. I think I had like a speech rehearsed and I said, hey, I'm an architecture student. I need a summer job. Do you remember this?
I don't remember the call. No, I'm sorry.
That's okay. And you said, yeah, come on down. I need some help. And that was it. And it kicked off my architecture career. And I worked there for several summers. And had an amazing time. And I would say, along with Jim, who's still with you, is now your vice president. It was an amazing run there, and I learned so much. And we'll get into kind of some of the things that I learned. But as I said, I'm so glad to have you here on the podcast.
I am glad to be here as well. I've gone back and listened to a lot of the prior episodes of The Anti-Architect as well. And going back to your first episode, one of the things that you said was that you had learned through your internship with me that, and if I can just make sure I get the quote here,
no.
because I did write it down, that you learned that you didn't want to do residential because it would be a horrible existence for an architect.
That's hilarious.
I'm glad that I was able to help you get steered in the right direction.
That seems a little extreme, but yeah, that's funny. But no, I did learn that. Like, I always wanted to do big buildings in big cities. That was always my thing. Looking back, sort of, especially in doing research on you for this, you have an incredible practice. And I think I would rescind my words there. I don't think I could do residential architecture in the same way. And we'll get into what that means, in terms of single family homes. So if you had to pick one thing, what annoys you about your fellow architects?
It's funny. Obviously, I knew you'd ask a question of this nature. And as a rule, I don't really hang out with architects, right? It's just not sort of something that I do. Yes, I'm a member of all those organizations that you mentioned. It sounds like I'm really busy, but I don't really participate that much, to be honest. And because primarily I'm very busy on what I'm actually doing on the affirmative side of things. But, I think that I guess what I would say is that as a rule, architects are believed to be those who aren't going to make much money. It's what we're told from, the beginning of our education process. I think all of us had at some point that class where there's a professor who said, if you're here because you think you're going to make a lot of money, you're in the wrong place. You should go now. And I never heard of anyone standing up and saying, but why? And I think that, look, we know that the architectural profession doesn't have the same kind of income capacity that some other professional pursuits may have, but it is a great springboard to a lot of other things. And when you listen to what you just said about what I do, that's really what it is. You learn and you meet people and you gain all these other experiences and you find ways to involve yourself in other things that as a result you can do well and you can run your business well. But I think as a rule, we're not given any business education. We're told we're not going to make anything. We're told that design, that's all you do is to focus on the design at the cost of all else. And so as a result, we kind of believe that we're not going to, have a pursuit of financial and business success. Yet it's expected that we're going to go into business.
Yeah.
So I think that as a rule, as a practice, we need to think better about how that can be, because we can do better than that, and we should do better. We should plan to do better rather than be given that opportunity, or a lack of opportunity by it being sort of just said from the start, you're not going to make any money. So just be here for the love of this.
Why do you think that is? Why do you think that we're told that so early on in school?
In architecture school, the idea is to stay so focused on design as the pursuit. It's the opportunity to put aside all of the real world situations and just say, I'm going to focus on design and honing the process of design. But by the same time, they're also eliminating the ability to recognize where it fits into the practice of architecture.
Sure.
We take the class that's called that, but it has nothing to do with it. You'll only learn that after you've gotten into practice to realize that didn't tell me a thing. And I think it's a mistake from the beginning, because it sets up that mindset that you have to pick between the quality of design and the ability to have make a good living from the practice.
Yeah.
And I think that it's okay to say you could do both. And with anything else that we can pursue, if it's better, whatever that better widget is that you may sell, if it's better, you're permitted to make more. So if you're better at design, if you could do a wonderful design, you should be allowed to make more for it.
Yeah.
And I think it's unfortunately a rare scenario that you can reach that point in this profession, because it seems just established that we don't.
Yeah, and it's funny, I talk about it too on this podcast, right? Like, a lot of people do it for the love of the craft and the design, and they don't care about the business side. Even at my firm, when we force the business side almost on people, hey, your projects need to be profitable. Hey, you need to go collect this. Hey, we need additional services for this. Stop giving away the farm. And listen, I'm the first one to give away the farm.
That's the other first quote I have from episode 1. Christian is Santa Claus.
That's right.
So
that's right. That's what our CFO Bola calls me.
Yeah.
Santa Claus. I do. I love rewarding people for doing great work. I really do. And if I could pay everybody, as much as, the market could demand or more, I absolutely would. Like, there is no doubt, if we could get more money, I would pay people more money. It's not about me sort of keeping money. It's more about keeping everybody happy and moving the firm forward. So, but yeah, it's interesting that way. What about on the construction side? We'll get into sort of you've always been involved in construction, but do you think architects know how to actually build, how things get built?
As a standard, absolutely not. And it's one of the problems within our industry, right? Because there's such a separation between architecture and construction. And the architects are supposed to be writing this how-to manual that says, here's how to build this thing that I've created with the client. And yet the drawings are really the subtext often that says, I really don't know how to do this. I'm hoping you can figure it out, but it should look something like this. And I think it's important that that architects should have more time in the field. I try to encourage my own employees to get to our job sites. Yeah. And even at that, it's difficult because we're fortunate to be so busy. They've got their deadlines. They've got all the things that they need to accomplish. And they'll go, well, how do I get down to the job site? And yet I really want them to see that because there's so much that you learn being on a job site. I know what I understood as an architect when I first started my practice. I know how much of what I do now I've learned in the construction process. And I'll bet there's more that we do on our construction documents from what I've learned as a builder than from what I've learned through my practice itself.
Yeah, I'm sure.
And it is a very different set. We've very much changed the anatomy of a construction document set in order to do what we've understood about how you explain to the people in the field, here's how this needs to go together. And one of the things and I have some great people working for me that really do understand those details, who can put together these details in a way that says, if we haven't described that well in our set, we're not finished yet.
Yeah.
This goes back to that difficulty of how do you make money? How do you get the set? So we'll sit down sometimes and talk about that. How do you make a set of construction documents that really defines the process and is that highly detailed and still make money at it because you're spending all that time? And it's always a difficulty. My staff usually says, just raise your fees. Just ask for more.
We have the same thing, right? Exactly the same thing. But I will say, and we could talk about this a little bit later too, is that I did learn efficiency of drawing with you. And maybe it was because we drew with, pencil and vellum at the time, that you couldn't just mass produce a bunch of garbage and print it out. You had to be selective with what you drew by hand because you couldn't just photocopy it and change it again and photocopy it and change it again, just like you do now on the computer where it's just a variation on a theme, right? Yeah. So you had to figure it out. I had a previous partner at Mancini who he would constantly harp on everybody that we're overdrawing. And I never quite understood because at the time I was always doing the drawing. Yeah. And I was like, but how am I going to explain this? I need to do it. But he was right. We were overdrawing, You go to the site and the contractor skips half the thing, looks at general dimensions and goes, okay, this is how I'm going to lay this out and this is how I'm going to do it.
But I think that's also because so often the drawings are so unclear that the contractor thinks the better use for the set is to turn it over and just make sure I don't get any of my lunch on the hood of my truck. And I think it's important that if you have a set that says, I understand how to build this, then I think they'll pay more attention to those details. And I think, my staff has created sets of drawings that has garnered really good compliments from builders. And I think that's a huge thing. Yeah. To be able to get the contractor to look at it and say, wow, there's a lot of information in here. There are also those contractors who get scared by that because they want the opportunity to make their own decisions. And a good set doesn't allow for that. It really says this is how you do it. And I think the overdrawing question is it our job to tell the contractor exactly what to do, or just here's the image I'd like it to be, you figure out how to get there. And I think it's important that we say, here's how you do it. That's how you control the overall cost of the project. Yeah. And I think it's important that as architects, we need to know that. So there's another answer to that question. Yeah. What do we do wrong? As a general rule, we don't know how to build.
Yeah, I totally agree. I want to talk a bit about residential architecture and focus sort of on single family homes for a little bit, the the part of the profession that I would have, that was torture.
Yes.
What attracted you to start your practice sort of around single-family residential?
I think it was really my primary experience with architecture. I actually grew up, before I moved to New Jersey, I lived in Massachusetts, and I grew up in Plymouth County. So I was as far back as, the surroundings to Plymouth Rock, and would ride my bike there and see those things. And so my experience in architecture was at a more, sort of more personal level like that than it was at the larger cities. And while I lived near Boston, I was rarely in Boston. So for me, it was that, along with my parents had a house built, and while it was really nothing to write home about, that experience was something that resonated with me, and I just felt that was something that I wanted to be able to do. And I've known since I was a little kid, I wanted to build buildings. I just didn't really know what that meant, but I knew I wanted to do that.
That's interesting. So I talk about this, my experience in architecture. I credit to my mother, who was always renovating our house, and I was fascinated by watching the contractors just build things and figure it. And it wasn't like we, hired an architect and it was a formal thing. It was, she wanted to raise the ceiling here or put a coffered area or put trim here. And I loved watching that building process. And that's what kind of inspired me as well. That's interesting.
Your experiences build you, right? And I think that for me, though, I'd never really thought that the larger buildings resonated for me. When I went to school, that was what we were supposed to care about. It was the rare project where we would do a residence.
Yeah.
And it was almost thought of like, well, nobody does that. Anybody can do it. So nobody's going to go to school to do that. And, but the other thing that really makes residential architecture a very different and I think very rewarding practice is the very personal nature of it. Because we do commercial work as well. And I enjoy that. And I have some really great clients that we work with. But some of those clients have also done their homes. Some where I've met them doing their homes first, some where we've evolved into that. And it is a very different relationship when you're doing the residential work for them, because it's all coming from their heart, and they're thinking about details that they just don't think about in the commercial side of things.
Yeah.
And it's really, we have one project right now that I believe it's going on its 10th year. And, talk about getting into the details. It's really, I met with them for years, once a week. I actually lived on the site for 2 years. And it was something where, that level of sort of personal connection is something you can't get on the commercial side. So for me, that's really rewarding.
I'm going to go back to that, but how do you keep the interest of your staff on a project that's that long? I know we have projects, like we have a hotel, and I won't say which one, but it stops and starts and stops and starts and going on for years and years and years. And it's one of those things where when you come back to it and of course, now for us in a big firm, 100-person firm, you've got to try and get the same people back on the project, which is a whole other task itself, right? But let's say we do eventually get everybody back on that project. There's this project again, what are we going to do? Do this for another 6 months and then it's going to get shelved again. How do you keep interest on a project that goes that long?
It is hard. And in fact, the same kind of tone, permeates this particular one as well. But, I think it's it's one of those things where ultimately when it starts to come together, some of those details that I'm talking about, that personal connection, you talk about that, you bring that back. You mentioned my VP, Jim. He went to this project not too long ago for an elevator inspection, and he hadn't been there in a couple of years. So the amount of really cool detail, these hand-carved stone details that we're doing both inside and out on this house, is something he hadn't seen. And he walked around, spent more time taking pictures of the place than he did doing the inspection. Brought it back, showed it to a lot of the others in the office, and I'm getting questions from them. Hey, how did you do this? How did you make that happen? How does this stand up? They're looking at this really crazy oval stair that is self-suspending, clad in stone, and they're just like, this doesn't make sense. Well, we have pixie dust and magic, but this is actually how it works. And I think those kinds of things that they start seeing when it comes back together, it takes in this number of years. There were several where the interest wasn't as strong, but now as those details are coming together, they're seeing it. They're really kind of falling back in love with what they knew. I mean, I have employees who've been here for that entire time.
Wow.
And so they started the project. They're still looking at it. It's probably the largest file we have, in our system. And it's a tough thing, when we get down to those details, at year 7 and year 8, and you're looking at it going, it's nowhere near done,
So you talked a little bit about this, the difference between commercial clients and residential clients. And I think that's where, for me, I've done residential, but more as freelance work when I was sort of living in New York City and working. I had a lot of residential clients. It was always apartments, right? And it was, I did do a very large apartment, 11-bedroom apartment. But most of my freelance work was 1 and 2 bedroom apartments, not super high budget, but, decent chunk of stuff. And I think what drove me insane was the amount of detail in terms of the minutia. It's not like that house that you're talking about sounds like those are fantastic details. But then there are the details of, well, I don't quite like that tile pattern. I don't quite like that. Where in a commercial, look, in a commercial, we do a restaurant. It's super high end. There's great details. But at the end of the day, there's only 2 bathrooms and they're identical, right?
Right.
You do some of the residential work you do, you may have 7, 8, 10 bathrooms, and every single one of them is different. Every handle is different. Every, mirror is different. Every light is different. And that, I don't know how you do that.
There are some projects where you have interior designers that you work with, and they're bringing a lot of these ideas to a project. You have others where you're doing that interior detailing yourself. For me, when we're building the project, I love to be the one doing that interior detailing because we're doing it kind of organically as the project evolves. When it's a traditional project, especially, because we have a pretty good mix of modern and traditional, some mixed within the same project even. But when we get to that traditional side of it, I'll love to get to the point where the sheetrock is on the wall and then go and sketch in full scale on the wall, the trim detailing.
Oh, wow.
And then we'll mock up different components of that. The same thing with tile pattern. We'll snap out lines on the floor and really look at it in the proportion of the space and get the client truly engaged in that level of detail. It's something that's very personal, so people can get very excited about it. When you got to have the right client too.
Yeah.
There are clients who are insatiable. There are clients who have this doesn't matter what you do, they're not going to be happy enough, and they're much harder to engage and get your heart into it. But when the client loves what they're trying to do, and we're getting all on the same page together with it, it feeds on itself. You lose track of time. You just get there and you do it and you have fun doing it. So it is one where the love of design and the passion of design and the passion of architecture is really where it comes from. You have to then step back to go, it's a business too. And how do we make that work?
Yeah.
And I've hired people to pull on my leash and go, we got to make this work.
So as far as you mentioned interior designers, so I assume some clients come with their interior designers and you work with them. However, I'm sure some are better than others, just like we have every now and then we'll have an interior designer that comes along and we can get anything from a napkin sketch and, a Pinterest board to some very detailed stuff. Like we'll work with Soho House and they do some very detailed, intricate designs, and then we'll kind of make that a reality. What is that like for you when working with interior designers?
It really, like you said, it depends upon the designer, right? There are some designers who can really collaborate so that the interior doesn't feel like you went to Interiors R Us after you built a great design for the overall building. The design needs to be one coherent design, even if it doesn't come from one mind. And so for those who want to work with you as the architect and hopefully recognize that the inception of this design is the client and the architect, and then the design is to enhance it, not replace it, then it becomes a great experience. For the designer who feels that they need to make their their show out of that, I think it becomes more difficult because you can get into this debate that never has an end, and somebody just has to give up at some point, and that's never the best design result, unfortunately.
And you mentioned there are some houses even inside, right, where there's a mix of traditional and modern. To me, you've never followed trends, right? You have your own signature style. I don't know if you know what your signature style is. I know when I was doing design work regularly, people would tell me, "Oh, all of your buildings look very similar," right? And I would think, all right, well, that's not true, but I could see why. So what is your design philosophy when sitting down and starting a project?
It starts with asking the client what they're looking for, right? We have to design for someone else. This is, after all, a service. I'd love to be able to have that situation where I can say it's a privilege for you to work with me, but I don't think that's ever really the case, right? I think it's important that we're able to know what the client's taste is. But very often the client will say, I don't really know. I like this. I like that. I like this. And so that then brings it around to where my love is in the embrace of eclecticism. Don't follow a set of rules, because if you do, you're just designing what you've already done. But bring them together into something where you can have a series of features that are identifiable, that bring you into the tradition that maybe is their taste or some of their taste, but do it in a way that it's uniquely that client's home. Yeah. And so, it's funny. You say that my stuff, I've had that critique where some of my stuff looks the same as other, and it's often because somebody says, I like this thing that you did. I want you to do that again for me. And you try to find ways to expand upon it and adjust and come up with something else. And it's an opportunity when somebody finally says, can you do something you've never done before? And you expand upon that style. You expand upon what is your signature. And if you can keep your hand to that so that it still says, I'm going to draw now upon some other flavor, some other style, but in a way that feels like it still comes from what my belief and my feel of architecture needs to be. When it's residential, I love to do homes that have a more human scale, even when they're huge. Yeah. And I want it to feel like when you're in certain spaces that you don't note that you're in this massive home, or when you're in this little home, you don't feel compressed. It feels like you can play with that scale and that feel, and you could do that in any style. And if you can do that, then I think I have my signature on that. Yeah. Yeah. No, absolutely. But I think having a signature is something to be proud of at the end of the day. I wouldn't say that everything looks the same. There is a style to it, which is great. And it's your style, which is kind of cool. You're not just, hey, today I'm going to do only modern farmhouse, right? Like, that's the thing. I see everybody with black windows and white, vertical siding now. That's like the new thing. Yeah. And I think that it's important that when somebody says, I want that white siding and black window frames, you figure out where it's coming from, why, what else you can bring into that, and hopefully not make it the same modern farmhouse that everybody else has. Exactly. So do you stay involved still as the designer, the architect, on all your projects, sort of the way I remember you sitting down and physically drawing? Are you still as involved? I very selfishly designed my firm around making sure that's what I get to do. So I do the design work. I have people that work for me that do the things I'm not as good at doing better than me, so that I don't have to do those things. So I have great people doing drafting, doing detailing, doing business management, overseeing the scheduling of the staff and so forth, so that I can design, I can meet with clients. That's what I love to do. Yeah. So I don't want to ever give that up. Obviously, as a business owner, as a practice manager, you have to do all the other stuff. So I have to be the primary salesperson. I have to be the overall business manager. I have to be able to deal with all facets, and I have to be able to deal with a mason as much as I have to deal with the CEO of a company that either we're doing commercial or we're doing his home. Yeah. And being able to flip those switches and move between those different worlds is actually very exciting. It keeps your blood moving. Yeah, no, it's a testament that you still do that. I could picture that, you sitting there and still doing the drawings and figuring out the design. Are you still hand drawing? Absolutely. That's great. To me, the only way to come up with a design is a pen and trace. And I just use different color pens to get different layers in my head, even though, the sense of layering in CAD, it's as though that was the first place layering came from, but it's not. And when you sketch, if you use different weight pens and different, some pencils and pens and different colors, that layering is there. And that's where I think it came from in CAD, is the thinking that is that. So sketching is, for me, the way to connect my brain to some image that I'm creating.
Interesting. So, and a little bit more on the residential, the single family side, and then we'll switch gears. But I know I want to talk a little bit about pricing, right? How should a residential architect be pricing work? Because I think it's interesting. I think it's interesting to the audience. We don't talk about this as often, right? I know how to price a 500,000 square foot corporate interiors job. I know how to price a 30-story out of the ground building. Seems awfully complicated, but to me, it's actually not. It's pretty commoditized. How should a residential architect price a design? I know it obviously varies, but
yeah, and it took me years to figure it out, and then I found out I was wrong anyway. So, because my staff keeps telling me I have to charge more, and I think the funny thing is I resisted my staff for the longest time. That well, you can't. Nobody's going to pay that. And then one time I went, maybe we should try that. And it turns out, yeah, if you can do a great job, if you can create the better mousetrap out of what you do, then you can sell it for more. So think about architecture, think about design the same way, but you have to start with creating the better, right? So you don't get paid to create the practice. You get paid once you have. And look, at the beginning of my practice, I gave away design. My contracts were that the design phase was free, and if you like it, then here's how much I'll charge you for the construction documents. I figured nobody could beat my price at that point. And for the most part, people then had me do the construction docs. It's how I was able to build a portfolio of work. And then eventually I had the bravado to say, I'm going to charge for design now too, and then little by little, you start realizing that people are appreciating what you're doing. And so you charge more, and you look at where your market is and who you're competing with. I've actually had clients come to me at times over my career and say, you can charge more. Not me, of course, because I'm now contracted with you, but the other people were charging this. And so you start learning that you can do more if you do a better job, if you can have a better quality, then people will seek out that better quality and they'll want to pay up for that. But the key for me, I think, is also that the practice is a word of mouth business. I don't advertise. I don't seek it otherwise. And so when someone comes to you pre-qualified, when they come to you and they've looked at your work, they know what it is. I mean, for me, we don't even do much in terms of social media. We need to start doing more of that so that people can see what we do even better. And I think when they see that and they recognize you as somebody who does great work, then they'll pay for that. Mm-hmm. But how do you do it? Is it formulaic? It's not, unfortunately. It's very difficult to say. But what we've worked on is to come up with some way of saying, how much time do we think it's going to take? And we look at it based upon our time investment into the project. And we look at the cost of the practice and what the cost of time and the cost of business is and say, here's how we need to have our base cost. Let's put a reasonable, moderate level of profit and overhead on there. And that's where we are. Right. And then it goes to negotiation and you never get that. So, but it's a hard thing because you can't really know for sure what it's going to cost you to produce it. You can only guess and hope you're right.
Some I know on the residential side sort of keep it very open-ended. It's a percentage of construction cost. Have you ever experimented with that?
Yeah, clients don't generally like that open end.
I'm sure.
They want to know before they start. No, of course
Yeah.
not. And I can understand that. I mean, I would hate to go to the grocery store and get a bill later saying that it seems like you enjoyed those eggs. We're going to charge you a little bit more now. I think it's important that that clients want to know what's it going to be before you start. And I think also what happens with the design process, when you are willing to put in whatever it takes to get that design to work, you don't want the client wondering if you brought them some lousy idea first so that you could charge them for the next one too. So if you take the money away from the design and you establish a fixed number so that it is what it is and doesn't, then they believe in what you're doing for the design. And the truth is, for a business that is getting its work from word of mouth, you have to make the client happy enough to say something good about you after you're done.
Yeah.
And if they feel like you did it for the billings instead of for the love of what you do, they're going to say that too.
Yeah, that's great. Very well said. So you mentioned you grew up in Massachusetts.
Yes.
What brought you down to Jersey and in this area, the Jersey Shore?
My father got a job in New York City, and we moved to New Jersey. It wasn't like I said, I think I'm going to move to New Jersey during high school. So.
And how do you think that kind of shaped you moving to New Jersey?
I lived here for 2 years before I went to school.
Okay.
And in fact, that first summer, I went to a summer program in Harvard. I was back in Boston again. And so I would say New Jersey almost didn't shape me. I left then, went to upstate New York for school. So I was really not about New Jersey at all. I actually knew very little by the time I got out of school and was back here. And yet now I feel like it's the place I'm from. It's where I've certainly been the most.
What made you come back and ultimately start your firm in Long Branch?
Again, my family was rooted here, so I came back to where the roots were at that moment. And I think it was less by deliberate or by design. It was just happenstance. I was here. But like you, I did the cold call opportunity for my jobs. When I got out of school, it was 1986. There was a decent amount of work happening at that time. And so I just called firms, and then I said, this is the one I think I want to work with. They're doing something kind of cool. And they wanted me to be involved in the design side, not just doing drafting of drawings. And I still had no idea, right? When you get out of college, you have no idea what that job is going to entail. And you think you have the world by the short hairs, and I'm going to design all these great things. And then you realize you know so little about what you have to do. And you have to learn it in 3 years. Mm-hmm. And hopefully learn it in 3 years if you're going to get your license at that point. So I was lucky. I did have a firm that let's call it, they allowed me to do everything. They also made me do everything. But I had two partners in that firm that were one was very code-oriented. He was also a licensed building inspector. The other one was much more on the design and on the sales side. And I got to see all the hats that we have to wear and learn tremendously from them. I was really hurt when they fired me because I got my license. But like the baby bird getting pushed out of the nest, I wouldn't have done it if they didn't push me out like that. So in the end, it was the best thing they did for me. But that ability to learn from them and learn about it here made me about being here, and that's where I stayed. And
so at the end of the day, you get fired, and then you immediately decide, that's it, I'm going to work for myself.
That was 1989, and there were no firms hiring anyone. So I hadn't really much choice. But at the same time, I had just gotten my license to practice, and I was still young and dumb enough to think that I could do it. And so I said, yeah, let's do this. I'm going to start my practice. And by the end of that day, I had sat down at my dining room table and drawn my title block. So I felt like now I'm in business. I have a title block. I know what I'm doing.
I remember you telling me that story that you drew your title block, which is still the same title block.
Oh no, I've changed it.
Oh,
since.
You have?
There's some snippets of it in there, but we tweaked it.
Okay.
Yeah.
But it was very intricate, which was great.
Yeah. I mean, it was a design. I had nothing else to draw at that point, so that's what I drew. And then I was fortunate that clients that I worked with at that firm gave me calls and said, well, gee, we know you're the one that was doing this type of work there. We heard you're going out on your own. And I think they also saw it as an opportunity. They knew that obviously I would not be
as expensive.
Exactly.
That's great. So I want to kind of touch on a few things that I remember as an intern from 30 years ago. Which I can't believe is 30 years ago. So we talked a little bit about it, pencil on vellum. When I went to architecture school, it was, in fact, hand drawing, right? Computers were beginning at that point. CAD was brand new. It was like CAD version 1 in MS-DOS and something weird like that. But I remember distinctly that your process was pencil on vellum, which is a little bit unique. But created beautiful drawings at the end of the day. And we used this, the blueprint machine that was in the same room that Jim and I worked in. And there was like an ammonia, was it ammonia?
Ammonia based, yeah.
Ammonia, and it stunk. And so even when it was like, 20 below, you'd have to open up the windows and freeze each other out because you couldn't breathe.
Couldn't breathe otherwise, yeah.
Do you still use that blueprint machine?
We do not. No, we caught up
That's
a little
too
bit.
bad.
Yeah. Although I believe it is in the basement.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So some museum someday may be looking for it. We'll see.
Yeah, I don't know if any other architects ever worked like that. But why the pencil on vellum?
You got a much better ability to control line weight. And line weight to me at that point was very important because, again, thinking about those layers, right? In CAD, we think in layers. in hand drafting, I wanted things that were plan as a section, right? Just a horizontal section. I wanted that to read. I wanted the places when you were cutting through a wall to be really, really bold and strong. I wanted with the myriad of dimension strings and notes and arrows and everything else on the set, I wanted that plan to scream out at you on the drawing. And so pencil gave us that ability to do it. It also gave new challenges, right? Because you ended up with these gray sheets. And your arms were covered in it.
Covered your whole sleeve. So there's a couple things I remember specifically that I learned from you with those techniques that I still profess today. Believe it or not.
Wow.
Very much the line weight thing. So I pride myself on my drawings, even when I replicated them in CAD, the line weights were based on what you had taught me, especially outlining sections. As a matter of fact, yesterday, I sat down with someone in our office and they were showing me something in plan. And I said to him, is there any way you could poche those walls? Like make them a little bolder? I can't tell. It's distracting. There's too many lines here that are all the same. And I think we've lost that art form of drawing, which, as you said, when the contractor looks at what they're going to build, it needs to pop. It needs to say, these are the walls, and now I instantaneously understand it.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's key.
The other thing I learned from you and from Jim specifically was how to survey. And you guys taught me how to survey. It seems like a silly thing. I tell the staff all the time, I love to this day surveying. Most people hate it, but I love it. And, now we go in with the Matterports and the LiDARs and we scan the living crap out of everything. Right. And you have too much detail. And I remember Jim telling me, you don't measure the wall, you measure the distance between the walls, right? Because no wall is straight. And when you look down and plan, you're not going to, every little variation you're not going to play with. It's just point A to point B and that's your wall. And same thing, very similarly, every now and then I'll still do a survey just because I enjoy it.
Wow.
And if nobody's available, I'll say, I'll go survey it. I don't mind. It'll be fun. So I'll go and survey. And one of the staff members said to me, what's on the Matterport and what you drew don't line up. And I said, well, I guarantee you my drawing is correct. Yeah. Because I learned how to survey the right way. And sure enough, he actually came back and he said, no, your drawing was correct. I said, I know. Yeah. It's always correct. I learned how to survey.
Oh, that's awesome.
And I mentioned this before, I think drawing efficiently in limited drawing. So now with, you've moved on to AutoCAD. I don't know. Do you use Revit at all? Have you?
We don't. And we've collaborated with some other firms on things. And we've needed to have them, sort of dummy it down to our AutoCAD. I don't think yet it's the investment for us. Mm-hmm. It's a lot to invest in. We've looked into it a couple of times, but we're still holding fast on AutoCAD.
Yeah. And so do you see, do you look back and think, well, when everyone was hand drawing and we were doing that with the blueprint machine, was it actually more efficient than it is in CAD?
No, look, the idea of CAD is that you can copy and paste things in an efficient way. We'll take a wall section from a prior project and we'll use it, whatever the most recent similar project is that we have, and try to make use of some of the graphics or some of the information, some of the things we've learned. As we build, we learn more things. Our construction documents become something better each time. So we always want to go to the most recent like that. But still, it's for us, everything's virtually a one-off. But the means by which you build doesn't change.
Yeah.
So that's something that we would still be able to draw upon. And I think, look, initially when we switched over to CAD, it was a partial switch. I was adamant that floor plans were still going to be hand-drawn because I wanted that graphic. But the sections, I felt, okay, that's the place where it's really going to make sense. And I knew that going forward for the rest of architectural eternity, that's the only place CAD was going to fit in. It was wrong, obviously, but I think that it makes the difference for us. But the way we use our line weights, like you just said, we've done the same thing to take all of the things that we did on the hand drafting and implement that into the way our CAD set looks. But I think that it's a key that we try to use our CAD software as an aid, right? Isn't that what the A is supposed to be, right? And make it so that we can do more and have more detail. And we do. A set of drawings that we did back when we drew by hand might have been for the same size home 12, 15, 17, 18 sheets, right? Now we're 35 sheets of drawings, because if there's another place you can cut a section and it's not the same as the others, then you're not done. You've got to do another section. Yeah. But you can take much of it where it's the same and only alter the part that you just did. And that's really very helpful. So we can do a lot better detail because of CAD. Yeah.
Another thing I learned from you is that architects should be able to size their own structure. That you don't need a structural engineer or an MEP engineer for absolutely every single thing you do. I feel like in my firm, and let's call it the big firms, there is this parsing out of every little thing, right? Where in your firm, I assume it's still the same way, is, look, you may need to call a structural engineer if there's something special or something different that you've done. But in general, an architect should know, hey, this is about how big it should be. This is about how it should go together.
You have to have enough of a feel, right? That you are not blindsided by when you do need to have an engineer work with you on something that you've not accommodated anything.
Yeah.
I remember one of your prior episodes, you're talking about your new office and that even you didn't leave enough room for your mechanical space, because we don't want that. We want it to just exist somewhere off site and bring in what we need in terms of, heat, air conditioning, electric, et cetera. And I think, though, that if we have a good feel for what it takes to do those things, and I will tell you that a lot of times I'll get lost in my design process without that. And Jim will say to me, you still need this. Where are you going to fit the AC? Where are you going to fit? And it's key, right? When we collaborate with others, we've had that same situation. As architects, we lose that. And it's really important as you're looking at the section to know how thick your floor is going to need to be based upon the system you're going to use. There are times we have to work with engineers. There's stuff that's just beyond our core capacity, and it's important we can collaborate with them. And in order to do that, we have to understand it.
Yeah, but I think you can start. Like I feel like we get the generation now is they can't even start. And I'll say, like, just put a 30 by 30 grid. If it's a commercial building. Make the columns start with 2 feet, make them 2 feet boxes, and move on from there, right? And generally, it's going to be pretty close to that, right? But there's a stuckness factor to that, where I can't start. I need all of these other trades to get me started. Which is, I don't know. I don't quite get it. I would say one of the other things I learned from you early on, and you're not gonna, you may or may not remember something like this, is you always worked past the time when everybody left the office. You were always there working. And that stuck with me. I am that way now. It's a little bit different because, you can go home and keep working, that kind of thing. But I learned that, the owner of the company works the hardest and works the longest. And that stuck with me, as opposed to, I think there's a generation now that people think that the owner, has the easy life.
Right. The owner makes their money off of the sweat of others' brow, right? And, if you're going to do a good job, you're going to set a better example, and you're going to do that. But also, if you're passionate about what you do, you're going to stay later because you're just trying to get that to happen. You just want that thing to be right, to be done. And I think that's something that, for me, came from school. When deadlines are set at midnight on a Sunday, it says to you, you're supposed to work the weekend.
Yeah.
It doesn't say you're working till Friday, but just pop in on Sunday and drop things off. And it kind of gave me the sense like, every hour is an available hour to do something really cool and creative, not just the work hours.
Yeah.
And that whole idea that if you can love what you do, it's not work. It's great. Sometimes it's still work, but you have to do that. You have to have that kind of a dedication to it.
Yeah. The firm's grown, obviously, since I think it was maybe 4 people when I was there. How large is the firm now?
14.
Okay.
Yeah.
And have there been struggles and challenges with the firm on the business side over the years, or has it always been sort of an upward rise?
Oh, we've had peaks and valleys all the way through. We've been through a lot of different economic up and down turns and situations where all the clients are calling and saying, put everything on hold, 9/11, the crash of '08, all those things. And yeah, I mean, I happened to be during the crash of '08 with a client that we were doing a development for them, residential development. And while we were there, this crash was occurring, and he was a former Wall Streeter turned developer. And while the crash was occurring, he was renegotiating our contract. So he's like getting live news and then saying to me, I think you're going to have to do it for this much now. And now let's get back to the design we were talking about.
Oh, man. When you talk about residential developments, these are suburban developments, but you're doing all of the houses in the developments.
Yeah, I mean, typically we don't do the development where you design one house that they build 12 different ways or 12 different times. We haven't done a lot of developments, but when we do, it's when they're looking for each home to be more of a one-off design. Yeah. And it's a little bit different. But, yeah.
I had looked at a development that you're doing now right here in Red Bank. On, I guess it's Front Street. There's a little alcove there, and there's all houses, it says, by Robert W. Adler, which is funny. And I thought, that'd be cool if Rob would design our house. But it was too expensive. I couldn't afford it. In terms of projects, what are some of the projects that you've done that you're most proud of? And I know you don't want to necessarily name names, but, there's a lot of interesting, cool people that live on the Jersey Shore. Talk a little bit about some of those houses.
Yeah, we've had great opportunities. We've had people that really want spectacular design, and not spectacular meaning ostentatious. It's not about trying to show off, although sometimes that happens. But we've had very creative and affluent clientele who give us the opportunity to be creative. So, there's been such a variety of opportunity for us. I mean, it's hard to say which are my favorite, because I think each year I find a new favorite. Mm-hmm. I can still look backward and find some that I love. The one that's been going on for 10 years has been actually a really great experience for us. And I love the project. I love the house. I love the client. Like I said, I lived there for 2 years. I lived there for 2 years because the client came to me when I was getting divorced and said, we want you to stay here.
Oh, cool.
And you'll get yourself back on your feet and then you'll move on, but you have this place to stay. And it was a guest house that I had designed. And so it was kind of interesting to have that, a client that cared enough, and I think what makes it a favorite project isn't always the end design, but the relationship that you build. And that's the opportunity in residential that I think often you don't have in commercial.
Interesting. So let's talk a little bit about the construction side of things. You have your own construction company as part of it. And you've always had that. I remember that from when I was an intern. You were a partner in a construction company. Now I guess you have one on your own. How did that kind of come about as part of your, I don't even want to say it's part of your services, but part of another thing that you do?
I think it was a twofold inception. One was the idea that the fear of failure, if you have each client an opportunity to do two things for them, you have more possibility for success. And so if I can both design and then build it, I felt this sort of backup plan comfort. But by the same token, I also had spent enough time in my internship and my first year in practice where I saw that the projects that were being built weren't being built the way we had drawn them or the way we had envisioned them. And so I felt if I could take the design that I'd created and then also implement, that I had better control over the quality of that design by the time it was finished. What I found out in that first year was the business of construction drives often the changes that happen from the design to the execution. And I found that architects, including me at that time, didn't know how to tell the builder what to do. And so that learning experience first was an expensive one. I had a lot of debt to pay off after the first couple of years of construction. But that's what I chose to do, was pay it off instead of say, I'm out of here. And that built some great relationships with people when they realized that I was going to go do other work and pay them back for what they allowed me to wait on paying. And so the construction then became a way of preserving the design at the same time as a great passion, because there's something really spectacular about having an idea long ago, creating it with the client, designing it to the finite detail, and then actually getting to put it together. It's the ultimate Legos. It's what I did as a 4-year-old, I get to do as an adult, and it stands up and stays there. It's pretty cool.
So are you more of a construction manager, or do you have staff, builders on staff, that kind of thing?
We're construction management only.
Okay.
So we don't have any laborers on staff. We subcontract all the components. It's the way we put experts on everything that gets done. I don't have a roofer working on framing or a plumber helping us out with electrical. I have great people that are experts in their trade doing that trade. And we have people that are our go-to team, sure. So that we can. But our method is also to be our client's advocate. So we're looking for the right one of each of those trades for our client for that project. So it may be a stable of 3 or 4 framers, and we're going to pick the one that really belongs on that project and help the client see that's the best one and get them the right price. So we're management as the client advocate. Okay. And it's a very different process, right? Because typically the builder's in business for the builder, and we have to be, right? Again, we want to make money doing what we do. But if the same thing we do with our architectural fee, we fix our construction fee so that it takes away the ability to make money on changes. And this way the client can believe us when we tell them, by the way, you're going to need this change order, but it doesn't come to me. It's going to go to that sub or to that supplier. And we work better as a team and as still somebody who's a friend with the client. Right. Because they see us as somebody who's out there to help them pull this thing together.
Do you ever do it as design build, like you're designing and then it's sort of all in one?
As time has evolved, we've had people where we've either built for them before, so they've said right from the start, we want you to build it, or where they've known somebody that we've built for, and so that's where the case is. That we've had clients, we have some right now where they're saying, look, it makes sense that the architect who knows how to put this together would also be our builder, because there won't be that dispute. There's a standard dispute between builders and architects.
Absolutely.
And the client's always caught in the middle of that. Mm-hmm. And unfortunately, they're not armed for the process of trying to fix that. They don't know how to be the judge or the jury over that dispute. So if you can eliminate that and fix the price so you know that you're not getting a sort of the fox watching the chicken coop. I think it's something that people appreciate when they really drill down on it.
Yeah, as long as you do an open book where you say to the client, this is how much it's going to cost. These are what these people are costing. I vetted all of these people. And by the way, this is the profit, right? Yeah. There's nothing wrong with that.
Right. I show people we're going to make a profit doing this. And I think that most of my clients have enough success in their own finances that they know that should be. And they wouldn't respect me if I didn't. And I think that's important. I feared that at one time. I remember much earlier in my career thinking I was ready to get my next car. And I'm thinking I have to really not get anything all that great because people might think I'm making too much money. And I had a client say to me, no, we want to see that you're doing well.
Yeah.
Who wants to hire you if they think you may not be around in a couple of years when we might have another question for you?
Yeah.
And I started thinking differently. Even the way I dressed, I changed because of this particular client saying to me, your success is important to us. Mm. And I never really thought of that in the earlier stages of my career. So to show the client that you're going to make a profit is a really, I think, a great thing. Yeah. Not a wrong thing, but also to show them that it's a reasonable and moderate profit, not.
Yeah, you're not gouging them.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's So let's talk a little bit about, as we kind of close up here, the Rumson Historical Society. I mentioned that in the introduction. You're the chair of the Rumson Historic Commission. What makes Rumson, New Jersey so special?
Because
it is a pretty amazing place for those
cool
who've
spot.
never seen it.
Yeah, I mean, look, this was a place that in back in the day, aristocracy, came here to summer, and so it's a place where great architects have built, right? There's Stanford White buildings in Rumson. And so there's a pretty steep history. And I'm still getting to know and understand it. I've only lived in Rumson for 27 years, so I'm not from Rumson yet, And, but just even the history of how the main road, Rumson Road, was once a dirt road, and the first sprinkler system was developed in Rumson, irrigation system, right, to irrigate the road so that it wasn't dusty for people who were driving in these open, cars that would just be filthy by the time they get to their summer home. They aren't, because there was this irrigation system. That's cool.
Yeah, very cool.
That's very cool.
Yeah, very cool. So as we wrap up, is there anything we haven't covered that you'd like to talk about?
Wow. No, I don't think I had any agenda other than to point out that you had said that being a residential architect would be a horrible existence, and I'm glad I started there.
I love it. Listen, it's the anti-architect.
Exactly.
Coming at me. It's great. It's great. Well, listen, I can't thank you enough for being a guest here on the show. You really did start my career, and I'm glad we reconnected. And it's funny how we reconnected almost like over LinkedIn years and years later. And, now we've gotten to spend some time together, and it's just been great to, as I've gotten older and kind of really look back and appreciate kind of what you offered me as literally a kid, probably 19, 20 years old at the time, getting my start. It's invaluable, and I can't thank you enough for it.
Well, it's been my pleasure to see how incredible your career has gone. It's actually been something I've truly enjoyed seeing.
Thank you.
And, I guess Frank Lloyd Wright started under a guy named Adler. So I'm proud to be another one in that sort of vein.
Well, I'll keep trying to make you proud and keep growing and doing whatever the heck it is that I do.
No doubt it'll happen.
Well, thank you so much. To see and learn more about Rob, you can and his wonderful firm, just visit his website, rwadlerassociates.com. And Rob, as I mentioned, is on LinkedIn. You can do that as well. Any other particular plugs?
We're going to be starting to show our work on other social media, so Stay tuned, and we'll get that out there too soon.
Awesome. Well, thank you again.
Thank you.